welcome to this edition of LiR Confidential on lirmedia.tv, and our email is info@lirmedia.tv. And our guest in the studio today is the former ambassador to Canada, Jamaica and the Bahamas, Mr. Ray Bassett. Welcome along again, Ray.
Thank you very much, Pat. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and thank you, as I say, for having me on.
And we're delighted to have you, Ray. And I can't believe, as I was saying before we started, it's been 6 or 7 months. The way time goes, but the way we are here in Ireland and elsewhere, every day is the same now, unfortunately. Ray, I have your book. I didn't bring it in with me. I left it out at home. But anyway, it's interesting. And even the things you did say, and people like you who did give this serious thought about the whole idea of Brexit and what could happen and what might happen and what the attitude we took as a nation on a political level towards Brexit, you know, really, when you look back at some of the letters about your utterances, I was looking back at it today before the program, and how people were giving out about you and all of that, but what you said is actually coming true. And it's incredible to me, Ray, at this remove, that we had 3 or 4 years to prepare for this event. And it looks like, we're talking about Brexit, of course, it looks like that we weren't prepared at all. We had the first debacle about the backstop. Do you remember that?
I do indeed.
And the backstop, to me, was the first huge impediment, you know, to building up a positive relationship with both countries to reconcile a new beginning between us, you know, but I don't know, as a country ourselves, we should have stood alone, and together you can do both, you know, and to protect our interests as well.
Well, my kind of disillusionment went back a bit further, because right back to the bailout, where I saw, you know, there was virtually no consideration given to Ireland, and also I was very surprised that political leaders I worked with and liked, and I thought they were quite good, were not standing up for Ireland. There seemed to be almost a mental block about the European Union. And then further on, when Cameron first of all said, don't point Juncker as president of the European Commission, it'll make life much more difficult for him to keep Britain inside the EU. And we completely ignored what Cameron was saying, even though we had said in the Good Friday Agreement we were going to be a partner, a friend with Britain, and we were going to have a new relationship, and we were going to be very, very good friends and try and put the past behind. And then when Cameron went off to Brussels and asked could he get a few changes in the relationship between Britain and Brussels, we were one of the most implacable enemies of that. I may have heard people saying we're not going to give them anything, we're going to be hard because people will think we're too soft on the British. And it just seemed to me that it didn't make the slightest degree of sense. And then we went, as you say, the backstop, which was probably the worst thing we did, because the backstop essentially killed off any pro-European or moderate section of the Conservative Party. So if you had set out at the start to end up with a government in London who was probably less sympathetic to us, and that we were going to get the worst possible deal, it's almost as if we almost wrote out the master plan on how to do that. You know, all our changes were far too little and far too late, and we never seemed to keep in mind the very central point that Britain is our next door neighbour. We're geographically here. We're between Britain and Canada in an English-speaking world, and reality seemed to go out the window. And it's as I said in the book, it's the one great sacred cow in Ireland. Probably a little less so now than it was 3 or 4 years ago. But, you know, I remember when I was growing up and somebody say anything about a priest, my mother say, don't insult the cloth. You just couldn't. It was beyond be pale to say a word against it. So the European Union took over that role as a sacred cow in Ireland, and it has led us to this situation where we're in a difficult situation now, and we weren't ready, because it didn't seem to be able to get into our head as the likely outcome of what was going to happen. We all the time placed our trust that Brussels was so big and so powerful that it was going to succeed all the time, and the Brits just didn't go with them.
And Ray, the surprise to me was the back seat that the Irish political leadership took in leaving the huge void for what we call the unelected in the EU to take the lead front and center in this, as you said. And this, it was incredulous to me that politicians like Coveney, like all of them, who had been in Europe a long time, who had been out and about in the real world, so to speak, could have stood like this, as you said, with our nearest neighbor, despite the history. We have more ties with England and Great Britain than any other country on the planet at the moment.
That's true.
And always had. We went there if we needed work, like I went there myself in the early 70s. If we needed work, where did we go? We went down to Rossdale and got the boat over and we got work.
Yes.
And I think that the goodwill that was there and the backstop killed that goodwill. And I think really it diminished in the eyes of the British political class, for the want of a better word. It diminished our politicians somewhat, and I think it will take a long while for that complete trust to be maintained again.
I think that's true. Although, to be quite honest, I'm always amazed at the British's ability to actually like us. You know, it's one of the things what we do. And you know, I spoke at the Conservative Party conference as a complete independent. I'm not a conservative or anything else. I'm myself. But you know, people would come up, and it's kind of almost in sorrow than in anger. But there is an element in Britain which have been very badly burnt by this, and feel Ireland has played a bad hand. And as somebody said to me, you always stab us in the back when it comes to it, and that is a very unfortunate position. But to get back to it, as I say, it is very, very difficult to understand why intelligent people and able people go to Brussels and seem to go weak at the knees. That they, you know. I used to go to Brussels all the time. To be honest with you, I was like perverse pleasure in saying no, because I never mind being in a minority of one in a group. But I'm always amazed that, you know, people can go to meetings in Dublin before a meeting in Brussels and sound blood and thunder, and then you go over with them and they seem to fold. And you know, we were a bit isolated there, couldn't do it. But you know, I remember once there was one particular case. And it was about, I don't want to go very long into the background, but it was about minority schools in Ireland, mainly Protestant schools. And it was a European proposal that you couldn't recruit people of your own religion into certain positions. They wanted to abolish any reserves. And of course, Archbishop Eanes and the whole lot came down to Dublin and asked us to try and help it stop it. And Taoiseach agreed. He said that we don't want the small minority schools in the Republic to sort of be swamped. We agree that you should be able to retain a certain number on your staff of your own religion to keep the ethos of the school.
Yes.
And I remember going to armed with the Taoiseachs imprimatur, going to a meeting with the rest of the departments, and I said, it doesn't matter. We're just not agreeing to it, and we'll veto it if we have to. And I thought that they were all going to have a seizure. You know, I said, but according to the rules, we can veto it. And but somebody says, Ireland doesn't veto it. We never veto. That would cause ill feeling with the Commission. I said, yeah, so, but the Taoiseach has said, give me an order. And usually if you're given an order in an organisation, they're paying your paycheck, you do it, provided it's legal. And again, I just couldn't understand people who could be quite strong, quite intelligent and rational. When it came to Europe, they almost folded. It was just an article of faith. You do not cross the empire, you know.
And you yourself, Ray, going back to the Good Friday Agreement and all that, you had a lot of contact with what we call with unionism, so to speak, with the unionists in Northern Ireland. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I mean, those people, they're decent people by and large, coming from a different political understanding. I have a lot of friends in Northern Ireland. I spent a lot of summers up there, summer holidays up around Northampton and all there. And you yourself, I mean, their attitude to something like that, like Brexit, I mean, they were in an awful position. Never mind about us. We had the protection over our shoulder for 26 more countries. They were looking at themselves. They were looking down south, and they were looking across, and they were saying, are we all alone in this? you know?
Yeah, and I think we have an obligation in that to when we were at Good Friday, we promised that we would, and I believe the promise that we were going to treat both communities with parity of esteem. And I was very, very opposed to the idea of any form of border on the island of Ireland, which the British government were as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes our government builds up a straw man to beat it down, like we saved the British were every bit as strongly against the border. Remember, the British lost 1,000 members of their security force in Northern Ireland in the Troubles. It cost them hundreds of millions, not billions. They were determined. They're determined not to see anything to ignite it again. So the idea that we stood in the breach on our own is off the wall. But funnily enough, in Northern Ireland, the nationalist community didn't really engage in the referendum. There was less than half the people turned out in West Belfast. Derry had a real low poll. They took no interest in it, and there was if there was a debate in Northern Ireland, there was a debate within the Unionist community and some of the SDLP, but the broader nationalist community didn't engage to any great extent. So the vote, we don't know how the Unionist vote broke down. Probably a small proportion, a majority was probably in favour of Brexit. But I think, as I said in the book, by our actions afterwards, we burnt a lot of bridges and personal relationships that had been built up. We can be anti-Brexit, but it was the tone and the dismissal of their arguments. And the fact that we had a Minister for Foreign Affairs who kept extolling the virtues of a border in the Irish Sea, while saying you can't have a border on land. Now, if you're a believer in the Good Friday Agreement, you have to take the aspirations and the linkages of both communities seriously.
Yes.
And I just thought that we didn't. And I think a part of that problem was that everybody who'd been involved in Good Friday negotiations, politicians, officials, were all gone. So it seemed as if the people were quoting parts of the agreement that didn't exist and ignoring huge chunks of the agreement. I'm a bit of a soapbox on that pattern.
Oh no, I mean, I agree with you, Ray, somewhat, because would it be true to say, just a question ran into my head, that Theresa May was scuppered by the backstop, handcuffed?
Absolutely. I mean, as I said, I would have good connections with political parties in Britain, and Brady, it was known as the Brady Amendment. He is head of the 1922 committee, and he told me that all his backbenchers would have voted for a deal, for Theresa May's deal, if it didn't have the backstop in it. Yeah. And the backstop was rammed down their throat. And it wasn't just the backstop itself, it was the language used around it. I remember the Taoiseach saying at that time, Leo Varadkar saying, we are the stronger ones now. We were the weaker ones before. And language like that is horrific. I mean, Con Houlihan was a great sports writer.
He was.
And I remember when some Kerry fellas were boasting about before they played Dublin, he said, one bit of advice to you, don't insult the crocodile's mother till you cross the stream. So don't start talking about that. And it's a very, very, very true. Don't go around goading the other people. It wasn't the Kerry, as you know, Kerry always say, we were lucky to be in the final. They always played themselves down. And I think we could have learned a lesson in humility a bit at that stage, and now the whole rhetoric is gone. That's all. You won't hear a word like that now.
No, but I think Varadkar himself, not to be too harsh on the man, I mean, he wouldn't be my cup of tea, but that's only a personal opinion. I think political naivety has something to do with utterances like that as well, And I think they came across far more divisive, I'd say, than he ever thought they would. I'm only just being the devil's advocate, but I think his political naivety, if you're like that, he was young in the job, he's a young politician, he should have left those utterances and negotiations to people who are, I suppose, better regarded and known with the British politicians as well, yourself,
Yeah. Well, in fact, I know one or two people in the media in Britain, and they said if you put the name Leo Varadkar on any story in Britain, get a huge interest, because he's very disliked. And I mean, he's our local TD here, and I know him,
yeah,
and he would have known my nephews and my son, and he's actually, on a personal level, I met him. once you get past that initial kind of reserve, he's actually quite nice. But I think he did a lot of damage, and his image in Britain is very bad, and particularly in the Conservative Party. And remember, you may like or dislike the Conservative Party, but you've got to accept that the Conservative Party are the natural party of government in Britain. Tony Blair was an aberration, and so was Harold Wilson. But fast spoke at the time you're dealing with Conservative administration. So, you know, you can look around it. The chances of Keir Starmer being Prime Minister in the next 4 or 5 years is very small. So, you know, all this sort of building up and spending your time fighting with the main political party across the water, I think it's just, it doesn't make sense.
My special guest here is Ray Bassett on LiR Confidential. And Ray, you're dead right about the Tories in Britain. I mean, Keir Starmer, he's a different kettle of fish for the Labour Party. But I mean, if they are ever to get into power, we both know we're pragmatists, I think, that way. With the amount of seats that the Conservatives won in the last election, it will take at least 2, if not 3 further elections for them to gain those things back with the first past the post. And so, you know, really, the political reality for Britain is the Conservative Party, despite every political party has its faults and negatives and all. I like, on a personal level, I like Boris Johnson. Did you ever meet him?
I didn't. I haven't met him. I met a lot of their earlier leaders. I met Brandon Lewis, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland recently. And I was surprised because his image isn't great. When I met him, he was actually much brighter. And I asked him a question. It was in a policy exchange meeting where I was asked to kind of be one of the people to ask him questions. And I said to him, you know, things between Dublin and London are bad. I said, what do we need to do? And I said, and he said, look, I'm not going to say anything undiplomatic, but I think we badly need a fresh start in our relations. Can we just sort of start from here? Because both sides have to build up. And I thought that was a very good answer. So I think, you know, it's in Britain's interest to be friendly with us and ours with them. It's time we put the period of the Brexit rupture aside. And to be honest, I'm beginning to pick up, you know, you're beginning to hear, you know, Micheál Martin saying maybe we should be looking at the whole COVID as a 2-island solution. You know, and Leo Varadkar saying, you know, on conductivity, Britain gives us nearly half the people who arrive in Ireland arrive from Britain. So they are the number one. So it's beginning to dawn on them that, you know, that we're not talking of equals between Britain and Slovenia, for instance, in relations with Ireland. Britain is easily the most important bilateral relationship, and it's been damaged, and needlessly damaged in my view.
And the biggest amount of tourists, if we'll ever get back to the tourist industry, is from the UK.
Yes.
But you mentioned the policy exchange. That's a UK think tank. How important is that as well in the background? Because an awful lot of these bodies now, we have an association ourselves recently with the British and Irish Trading Alliance, which is, I suppose, in more sharp focus now than anything before, you know. But how important are those, Ray, in the background, you know?
They're very important in terms of policy formation. We don't have them much in Ireland, but we do have them in America and Canada and Australia, and that independent think tanks, as they're called. They're essentially policy organizations which put forward, say, a new policy on, take anything as mundane as transport. The problem in Ireland is that you essentially have the state organizations which do their job, but there's virtually nobody outside the state with prestige enough to sort of say, you know, and put forward a proposal. We've only got 2 main groups. One is the European movement, which is funded by the government. They got $500,000 a year. Got $500,000 a year last night to pay for. And you've also got the Institute for European and International Affairs, and they are also heavily funded through corporate sponsorship by state bodies. So you do need people to come out and, you know, sort of take an area of policy and do an alternative approach. You may not get it, but it's an extra feed into the government. Otherwise, gets very staid. And the policy exchange is probably the most prestigious one in Britain. Now, I have a connection with it, but I'm not central to it, to be quite honest.
No, it's okay, yeah. And they're very important, Ray. I 100% agree with you as an ex-civil servant like yourself, but we don't have a tradition of it. It's, as you said, it's more than time. It's a way past the time to have a tradition. I have to give a shout out to my nephew. The Emerald Foundation is a new think tank that's starting up now as well. I don't know if you've ever come across it yet. The Emerald Foundation.
I haven't, Pat, but they're very badly needed. And in Britain, there are 10 a dozen. And what happens is often somebody who's made a lot of money, decides, I'll set up a think tank who might bring forward proposals in the area. Say somebody was interested in promoting equine sports or something like that, and put forward, instead of going to a company like Accenture or these and doing it as a commercial activity, because any group of consultants you bring in, they always have to be cognizant of the people paying them. This can be an independent one that doesn't have any skin in the game and can put out a sort of an opinion on it. Universities do it to some extent, but in Britain and a lot of other countries, it's very organized. It's a whole section of society.
Now, and you did right there. I suppose the obvious one in Ireland that we could start from would be the universities. You're dead right there, because you have a connection as well. You're a busy man, you have a connection with the National Committee on American Foreign Policy through Yale University. Yes,
well, when I was up in Belfast, basically the Irish government's represented in Belfast, a lot of American politicians, students used to come through, and they would sometimes come into the Irish government offices in Belfast for a briefing. And I got friendly with some of them, and some of the students then eventually moved way up the grade and sort of got into prestigious universities, and particularly one particular person I deal with in Yale University. So when I was retiring from Foreign Affairs, and given that they were talking about conflict resolution, they said, would you come down and give the occasional lecture in Yale? And it developed after that. And I managed to get General John de Chastelain in as well, and one or two.
I remember him, yes.
Who I was dealing with during the troubles in the north. So it is built up from then. And the National Committee on Foreign Policy in the United States, they're linked into Yale, and that connection with that committee worked from Yale. So I take seminars over Zoom about once every 3 months for students of international affairs, and they ask questions about what led up to the ceasefires in the north and connections with paramilitaries and all that sort of thing. And it's purely on a teaching basis.
Well, that's very good. And of course, now we can't leave America. We've had a change in America recently, as everybody knows. Now, what could that mean for Ireland now? Because with the Biden-Harris regime coming in, I don't know. What do you think yourself?
Well, I think it's no harm for us to have a person in the White House, the top person in the White House, who's interested in the area. And I mean, I hope that he manages to keep London, Brussels, and Dublin honest on the Good Friday Agreement, and having an interest in that. In some other areas, it may not be so clear cut. The Democratic Party in the United States are very protectionist. They don't go for instance, in trade deals or things like that. And Biden has said that he's not going to talk about trade deals until he manages to repatriate a lot of American industry back to the United States. So on the area of foreign direct investment, I don't think Biden is going to be any easier to deal with than President Trump. But it is good, and it is good to be able to have a political connection with the White House. Now, the Irish government have never really worked through the State Department, the Foreign Affairs Department in Washington. We've always gone through the political route, and to get to the political route, we usually go through congressmen and senators. But now to have President Biden, who clearly has an interest in Ireland, I think it can be good. But on the economic side, and certainly the mood in America is becoming more protectionist and more anti-offshoring all the time. So, and I don't think President Biden is going to be any less strong on that than President Trump.
And that's interesting what you said there now about the State Department that we seem to go, because I interviewed there a couple of months back Dan McGovern, who was involved in the legal side, but he served under Reagan and he served under George Bush Sr. You know, Dan McGovern, he's Irish American from California, and he had much the same. I mean, they didn't have much contact with people on the ground coming from Ireland. They went straight, as you said, to the politics of it, rather than to the administration of it, which I think it's important that you build up friendships in both, you know, because politicians will come and go, as we both know ourselves, you know, and then, but there's what we call the permanent government will be there through thick and thin. But I think about, it's just what you said about Biden, because I think that America itself, from our own few contexts there, it's extremely divided now politically. And there is this bitterness and divisiveness is going to take a while to heal, you know, between both Republican and Democrat, I think. I don't know, you know.
I agree with you, Pat, and I think, you know, I you know, it's purely a personal point of view, but you know, starting to do an impeachment trial seems to be the worst thing you could do about bringing people together, particularly when the person's no longer in office. And you know, there's something in me, and I don't like this idea that you can't let people stand for election. You know, the whole business of democracy is, you know, if that's what the people want, the people have a right to whoever elected representatives on. But this idea that they're trying to, and some members of the Republican Party, to essentially nobble President Trump so he can never stand for an electoral office again, you know, that's not the way to bring people together. And you're right, there's huge division in the United States at the moment. And, you know, the new administration have said all the right things in some areas, but they need to make sure that they follow that up with action.
Yeah, and I think they shouldn't forget either that there's midterms coming up, you know, which comes around very quickly in the administration in America in 2 years' time, which, as we know, is a very short period of time. And there's 70 million plus for Donald Trump. But you know, I think it's a reflection on the paucity of political leadership in America, as you said, that they would be considering impeaching President Trump again. Now, I'm not for or against. Look, people are politicians, but I think, as you said, imagine starting your term in office with something like that. It's a bad reflection politically.
I think so. And I imagine President Biden doesn't want to do it, but there are other people in the party. I mean, obviously, Nancy Pelosi is determined. And, you know, sometimes it's well to, you know, show the generous side rather than go after your political opponents.
All right.
If you want to bring people together. And remember, as you say, the Democrats have a wafer thin majority in the House, and they're equal in the Senate. The chances are they're going to lose both in the midterms if history repeats itself. So, you know, what goes up comes back, and you know, it might be a good time now to build bipartisan policies which will survive an election rather than have the, you know, huge swings from one side to the other, you know.
And before we leave President Trump, what do you think? I know I didn't discuss it before the program, which is the way we rambled into it. What kind of a legacy? I mean, he did some good. You know, every president does some good. We know that, you know. And after all, they are the president of America, not of Ireland or Europe or Britain. People forget that sometimes, you know, that they're president of the United States of America, and that's it, like.
He did good, and it was the curate's egg, as my teachers used to say.
Yeah.
I mean, he was very unpredictable, and at times he was unnecessarily rude. But if you look back on it, certainly on the economy, he did very well until COVID hit him. He was the first United States president who didn't start a war. And the danger is that the Democrats tend to be much more warlike. Despite what we say in Ireland, the Democrats tend to be much more into using military force. Of course, President Bush wasn't shy about that either. And he, you know, one thing he did do was he changed the course in China. That, you know, that he identified that China was doing, particularly in the economic and other areas, practices which weren't fair. Now everybody's saying it, and he was the first to understand, and everybody was shocked when he said it. So they're the good part. The bad part, as I say, is he probably, I didn't like the way he was drilling in Alaska and places like that. Somebody said the next person who will represent the same views for President Trump will be a lot smoother and will be a lot more, efficient at getting it. The other area which I sometimes had disagreements with with people in Ireland is President Trump was absolutely right about the need for secure borders. I mean, it's a basic of a country that you should have an idea who's coming into your country. And if the whole southern border was open, I can't understand again why people can't say, we can have a reasonable immigration policy, but it has to be an ordered one. It has to be actually, something that we can keep control of. So, I mean, at the start, though, maybe President Trump has changed the whole landscape in a direction where some of the things we said when he said it first, we kind of almost said, "Oh, that's terrible." And then when you begin to analyze it, a lot of it makes logical sense. But as I say, I don't want to diminish, the fact that he caused huge divisions and he could say outrageous things at times. But overall, I think he left under a cloud. I think in retrospect, he will emerge better than he did at the end, because the disgraceful scenes from Washington have marred his legacy. There's no doubt about that.
It has, yeah, and that's of course they were nowhere comparable to the Black Lives Matter riots and burning. And people shouldn't forget that either. But
the media decide their own. Like there was, there were riots for years and deaths in Paris and France during the Yellow Vest, and nobody was covering it. It was almost like they deliberately decided these guys are bad, so we can't cover them. These other guys are good, so we cover them. And I was watching a program on BBC there where Emily Matus was interviewing Megyn Kelly, and Megyn Kelly said, people are giving out about some of the wider stuff on the right-wing media, but they have to accept that one of the reasons the right-wing media has emerged is that the mainstream media has gone off the Richter scale. Watch CNN, and it's polemic. There's no attempt. And if you, again, I don't want to get on my hobby horse. If you watch RTE, anything about Brussels is explaining the Brussels position. They're not saying they made a complete mess of this and now they're going mad blaming everybody else. In the end, everyone else is to blame. So the mainstream media has lost the balance, and I think they've got to accept some of the blame for the descent in partisanship in the media.
You're right, Ray. And before we leave, what's his name, Donald Trump, he had some dampening down of his trip to Korea, of putting a dampener on the saber rattling of North Korea. I think he did some positive there. Also, he did put some positive shape on the Arab-Israeli relationships as well. He but there's a beginning of an association there now that wasn't there before.
Yeah, I think he certainly had a refreshing ability to actually fulfill his election promises, which kind of shocked people. That when he said he was going to do something, he certainly tried. He was, from what I hear, the whole White House operation, was very disorganized, and that was a problem with him. That this wasn't ultra efficiency. He could jump around, but I think you do need people who challenge the status quo and who do sort of say, why are we doing this? Because a lot of the time we do things because essentially they're there and we've always done it that way. And having somebody who was a disruptor, and he was a disruptor, is refreshing. And I think you often end up with a better balance in the end from a disruptor, somebody who will challenge first principles, not just accept that this is the way we do it. That's, well, why do we do it like that? No one do it slightly different,
Well, we have a local newspaper here in Clare called the Clare Echo. Mm-hmm. And one of the headlines on the Clare Echo, it had West Clare businessman and hotelier running for the president again of America, which I thought was just fantastic. It's a fantastic headline,
It's like that. There's a place in Canada called Prince Edward Island. It's a very Irish place, but They're very like the Irish. Like if you talk to a fella from Prince Edward Island, he always brings it back to Prince Edward Island. He said, like, the fella who went to the moon, did you know that his cobbler had a friend from Prince Edward Island? So he always, as Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local. So he always brings it back. There was always a connection. A bit like Leitrim in Ireland. No matter talk to a Leitrim man about anything, and you get it back to Leitrim.
That's very true. Now, getting back to our own situation here with the COVID and the travel and all of that, Ray, I can't get my head around it. I mean, I can't go down. I'm not supposed to go down 5 kilometers, which is 3.6 miles. Now, the last time I looked, Algeria, for instance, is more than 5 kilometers of Shannon.
Yeah.
And last Tuesday week, 140 students flew into Shannon for UL. Now,
yeah, no, I
don't get this.
There's a certain puritanical element who are determined to sort of press everything down. Like if you drive 5 miles or you drive 7 miles, it makes absolutely no difference. I mean, there isn't a logic to it, and I think they need to actually start looking at things and say this has an effect, this doesn't have an effect. If you open churches for individual and personal worship, it doesn't have effect, so let's do it. But there's a trying to be a complete blanket ban on it. But I've been given out about people who say that you can have a zero COVID. You can't really be, unless you hermetically seal the country. I mean, New Zealand now has an outbreak. And New Zealand, what people don't realize is, when they're quoting these places like Australia and New Zealand, they're in the middle of their summer. If you remember back to our summer, we had 3 or 4 cases a day or whatever. Now, that might be an exaggeration.
No, it's summer, yeah, we've nothing.
You can't, all around the world there's been a spike. We've got a very particularly high spike, but everywhere around the world now, the cases are starting to come down, as it happens every year. Now, I wouldn't minimize COVID for one second.
No, I know what you're saying there.
But, you've got to keep a balance. And, some of the groups are trying to outdo the other in sort of being, we clamp everything down, and they clamp things down if they actually make sense. But the also thing is, in the end of this, we're going to have to make a living. And you've got to keep that under consideration as well. Like, if you borrow money, you have to pay it back. So, I'm all for borrowing money if it's necessary. But at the moment, there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to some of the policies.
And of course, in Italy, loads and loads and loads, about 60,000 businesses opened up one day. Yeah. In Italy recently, decided we're opening up and you can come if you want, you're welcome. And I think that's a good attitude. I'm not agreeing with everything they did. In Poland, you have the same situation beginning to happen now where people have to really get back to work. My maxim is, my own opinion, my personal opinion is this: open up the whole country. If you yourself have an underlying health condition, you don't have to go out there. You don't have to go into the shop. You wouldn't do it normally when there's a virus around. I think it's as simple as that. That's my own opinion.
Well, I think that the way out is the way. I don't want it to sound as if I'm repeating everything that comes from London, but what they've done in Britain is the way out, which is essentially said, once we've got the groups which are vulnerable vaccinated, then we're opening up. And they've announced the 8th of March, because they hope to have all the vulnerable groups inoculated by mid-February. That gives them 3 weeks for the vaccine to take effect. And that's the way to do it. We need a plan to get out. I mean, the other thing, I don't like to be critical of politicians, but the Minister for Health gives absolutely no confidence. You get the impression that he's kind of on a wing and a prayer and doesn't know what's going on. Like in Britain, they appointed a minister for vaccinations.
They did?
Yeah, and he's responsible, and he's given out lists and everything like that. You get the impression the vaccine arrived here, they sent it to some hospitals, they don't know who was vaccinated. That, to be honest with you, I would have brought in the army much more about the distribution of it, and set up field hospitals almost and inoculate huge numbers if we got the vaccine. And of course, right from the start, I've been telling people, stop giving away all your ability to manage the country. And now we see that with the vaccine, where we handed over completely a responsibility for getting vaccines into the country. Now, there's no harm whatsoever in cooperating with countries, but you can't leave yourself as open as Ireland did to, that the European Union was going to look after us. And if anything goes wrong, the government will get in the neck, and they've no power. The government have no ability, any great ability to get in vaccines because they signed all this away. Yet other countries have, are getting in. Hungary decided to get a vaccine in, and we seem to be not able to almost think for ourselves. The Minister for Health doesn't even know how many vaccines are coming into the country each week.
Well, he doesn't.
It's crazy what we think. And the person who made that decision to hand over all power in this to the European Commission should be fired, because people will suffer because of that decision.
We still consider ourselves as a sovereign nation, despite the fact that we're part of the economic situation in Europe. We're still a sovereign nation. People should not forget that, including the politicians. But I'm not surprised, because every time I see Stephen Donnelly on television, which is very rare anyway, I think of his famous or infamous interview with Vincent Browne on TV3. Remember that interview he did? People should look back at that.
I don't, Pat. I don't. Remind me of it.
You'll get it up on YouTube tonight. For anybody lucky or listening, YouTube Vincent Browne's dismantling of Stephen Donnelly on TV3, politically speaking, and then you won't be surprised, And we're not singling out Stephen Donnelly on this occasion as a politician to be derided, but nevertheless, he's tasked, he's decided, he agreed to take on his role as Minister for Health, and all the good things that come with it, including the fact that these lockdowns, these situations do not affect him materially. They don't affect anybody making those decisions materially. Unlike us, who are scrimping and scraping and trying to eke out a living and grab a cup of coffee in the corner of a street and talk to one of your friends. It's a shocking indictment of the lack of leadership in our political class in Ireland, and I don't mind saying it,
Yeah, Pat, you're absolutely right. And I just saw, and again, I don't want to be attacking my former department, but I saw Simon Coveney flew off to Brussels for a meeting of foreign ministers on Monday. Why did he do that?
Why?
Because he said it was necessary, and they're now talking about going to Washington for a meeting. Now, they don't know, but it's do as I say, don't do as I do. There's nothing on the foreign affairs meeting, and I've often been at those councils, that couldn't be done over Zoom in the time of a pandemic, while you're castigating people for going beyond 5 kilometers down the road. It's just nuts.
It's appalling, Ray, and really, honest to God, now, maybe I'm too long in the world, but recently, Goodman Enterprises flew in 1,500 people from Brazil to 2 meat factories in Bandon and Watergrass Hill. I know, do you know where they are? Bandon, Watergrass.
Yeah.
From Brazil, which has one of the highest instances of this COVID thing.
I can't understand.
Where's Frank Hall when you need him?
I get him on the buzzer.
I'm speaking with Ray Bassett here on LiR Media. And no, this is not a comedy program. This is a serious program on LiR Media with LiR Confidential. And we're delighted to have Ray. Before we wind up this chat, Ray, you touched there on it. I lost my mum before Christmas from severe dementia. She was in a nursing home. As myself and my brothers and sisters would say, she was imprisoned in a nursing home for all of last year nearly, which was a shocking indictment again, why we couldn't go in to visit her in a private room, dressed the same as the staff. I have never, ever accepted, We had to insist to see her. Anyway, look, that's my own personal opinion. And yet, we have the media, the mainstream media, particularly RT, and I think, Ray, myself, I don't know whether you want to comment on this, if you like. Every single news, I never watch RT. I don't watch RT really anymore myself. That's a personal choice of mine. But when I go up to visit my dad, he just has the 6 o'clock news on and the 9 o'clock news on. So you can't divide watch it when you're in the sitting room talking to him, And to have this carry on every single evening at 6 o'clock, to have this unelected guy, Tony Holohan, frightening the nation, scaring the nation with figures that are meaningless to people, including myself, who are looking at it. I think that should all stop.
I think so too. And I've never, maybe I was like yourself, Pat, a public servant, and I have never seen a public servant dictate policy on TV and radio in a way that he does. But it's also, and I don't want to go back to poor old Stephen Donnelly, it seems to be a very weak minister. Like, the minister should take control of this.
Yeah.
You know, we're panicking. You panic the people, and then you say to the teachers, open up the special schools, but you frighten the people out of them. Be free, and then how can you can't have it both ways. That, you know, a survey has shown that the Irish are the most pessimistic on this pandemic of anyone that was surveyed. And the reason is that every night you have this litany of gloom and doom all the time, and nothing what can be done. And the politician who actually calls for even more gloom seems to be the one that gets, you know, the top billing. But I agree with you. I think that, you know, we need to start talking about what we can do, not what we can't do.
Exactly.
And we should be sort of saying, you know, is there any areas that in the lockdown now, which is unnecessarily knocked down, and we can open up in a safe way? And unfortunately, I mean, for instance, I can't understand why they were giving out about because there was more cars on the road. If you're driving in your car and you're going from one place to another and you're not seeing anyone, what harm is it? I mean, there's no logic to it. The fact that there's cars on the road, that they send out the guards who don't want to do it, from any guard I know, and they're just annoying people. And there's no
they can't do anything. But Ray, they cannot do anything. Do people realize if I'm on my own driving in my car on my own, they can't turn me back. They can't tell me go back. They don't have the law to do that.
Well, it's just sort of to make life inconvenient, which I don't think governments should be about.
Not at all.
Like, hopefully we're now on a downward curve, and hopefully we can keep it, and hopefully we'll get some vaccine. The vaccine is a complete fiasco from what happened. And, you know, it's no point blaming everybody else if you're one of the main reasons why this has happened. But I just agree with you, Pat. The gloom and doom. I have a young fella at home. He came back from Rome, and he's been working from home. And I think if Tony Holohan disappeared, I'd have to check where my young fella's whereabouts was. Strike that from it.
Now, I'm looking at your book over your shoulder there, Ray.
Yeah.
How did it go for you?
It went very well. It sold about 2,000 copies, which was good. And I haven't seen that stuff for over Christmas.
Was that on hardback or paperback?
That was in paperback. It only came out in paperback.
The paperback isn't available today. I checked it on Amazon.
Is it?
Unavailable at the moment.
Well, I'll have to get onto them because...
Which means either it's sold out or they need to do another run.
Well, the distribution hasn't been great, to be honest with you. But there's certainly copies available with LiR Publishing Company, and you can get it directly from them. YPS, they're called.
YPS.
YPS, LiR Publishing Company. To be honest, I wrote to every publisher in Ireland asking them what they do, and they all told me no. And in fact, a friend of mine, Tim Pat Coogan, he's a great friend of mine, Tim Pat.
Oh, is it? I'd love to chat to him sometime.
Yeah, if you want, I'll certainly put you in touch with him. Tim Pat's great fun. But Tim Pat spoke to some publishers, and he's a very successful, and he was told, Ray Bassett's wasting his time. No one will publish a book here that's against the EU.
Go away.
He told me, and Tim Pat then, he got behind me and he endorsed the book and everything. And Tim Pat's actually pro-European. But he said, I just couldn't believe that they wouldn't publish it. So I had to go across the water for it. And that has affected distribution.
Well, it would, obviously, because they're over there. Although, obviously, I don't know why, because, I mean, it's a cracking, I mean, it should be in with all the rest of the reads, and I hope it will, like, as well, you know. And what about the libraries? How do you get into the libraries?
What I did was, there's O'Mahony's a Limerick have been distributing some of it, and
I saw it it's on O'Mahony's windows in O'Connell Street.
Yeah. Well, O'Mahony's have been sending it around to the libraries.
Oh, good.
Annie's and Hannah's. They're the two. There's people in Belfast want it, and I was going to bring it up myself, but with this, they locked me in, you know.
I'll go up with you. I'll get to say them. But Fred Hannah's bookshop, now that you mean, I know we're going on, that's there. How long is that?
Well, Pat, it's moved now. The Hannah's have moved off Marion Street. It's out now in Rathmines. They've moved out to Rathmines. They moved away from the centre from Dublin Centre, so they're outside. That was the first place Oscar Wilde ever got a job. I was reading that up on the wall the other day.
Oh, yeah.
He lived around the corner, and his first job was stacking books. Fred Hannah, or whoever his predecessor was, gave him a job stacking books. So it was the first time he ever made any money, was stacking books there, you know. That's you can ask that in your next quiz.
I mean, Fred Hannah's is an institution in itself. I can see why they move out of the city centre. So I mean, the
rents are ridiculous.
The cost of doing business. We are here in Mallow Street in Limerick, and the costs are still high here as well, you know, to rent any kind of a premises. But Ray, and how do you keep yourself busy now during the week before we finish up?
Well, I do a bit for the English papers, and I'm finishing another book, which is not politics, Pat. It's really about my childhood and the whole history of places around where I live, Castleknock, and it's called the Phoenix Park Way. So you walk the 11 kilometers of the Phoenix Park walls, and I go through Castleknock, where where Rory O'Connor was defeated, the last High King of Ireland. We had the Edward Bruce. Then you go down to Island Bridge, where Brian Boru camped. You go up to Chapel Lizard, which has huge connections with James Joyce. Then down to over to North, what do you call it? The North Circle Road, the old cattle market, right about there.
Yes.
So it's really, in some ways, I've been writing that for the last while, and it's really for my grandchildren to tell them, you know, when I grew up, this was the haunted house. You know, every area had the haunted house. This is where the witches lived. You know,
where you walked at the other side of the road and you were passing it.
Exactly. Yeah. Let on your grave.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm doing, and I hope to get that finished in the next month or so. But that's kept me busy, and it's great because I went back to all the kind of places, you know, your childhood places, and walking around. There's even places where the Irish soldiers before in the First World War trained. There's the remnants of the old trenches, and they're completely overgrown, and no one knows much about them. They're just in a certain part. And then you go up to Rattler House, where Winston Churchill spent his early years, and he wrote quite a bit about that. So I put it all together, and I'm going to get a few copies and give them to my grandchildren and things.
Well, that'll be great. That'll be great.
You got me on a hot soapbox there, Pat.
Oh, I'm telling you, yeah. We'll have to do part 3 now as well, Ray. But so mention my name or our team with Tim Pat. Do you know what Tim Pat must be? What age is Tim Pat?
He's about 86, I think, at the moment. You know.
God. And how lively?
His eyesight isn't great, but I was telling him that he should continue writing books, because Tim Pat has such a reputation that when any book that he publishes in the United States, there's a huge market for it.
Yeah.
Should have put him on Ray Bassett and Tim Pat.
Yeah. You have a word with him there when you meet him again the next time.
I will.
What's the picture on the other side of you there? I'm looking at with the 2 figures.
Oh God, that's the history of O'Connell schools.
Oh, because
that's where I went to school, and where I learned to be a fool. It's the old Australian poem.
My brain is running ahead of me. I'm thinking of all the programs I can do with you now, even by just sitting there and looking around and looking out.
I was using that actually for the search on because it's on the North Circle Road. It's not too far from the park, so I was writing about it.
Oh, Connell School, did that chap, did Gay Byrne go there?
No, he went down to Sing Street, the other side of the city.
Sing Street, sorry.
Sean Lamass and Sean T. O'Kelly and John A. Costello went there. It was the biggest school in Ireland for a long period. It was a huge school, but it was declined in recent years simply because people have moved out to the suburbs, and all the schools are out in the suburbs, and it was, as I say, the main one.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, Ray, I'm a husband for you, but it's absolutely fantastic. Time flies, and delighted here at LiR Media, and anytime to have you on. Anything you want to hold court about and enthrall our audience with, you're more than welcome to come along here, Ray. And from this edition of LiR Confidential, Ray, until we meet again, the best of good health, good luck, and we'll talk again very soon.
Okay, thanks, Pat. It was pure pleasure.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you. Bye-bye now.